I find myself being comforted with tenure, with title, with a home, with a yard. That when I think about the revolutionaries who have made change happen, that is scary. And then when God says, leave everything and come follow me, I mean, it's like, man, of course, we read those stories. Of course, yes, let's follow you, Jesus. But I'm like, man, I don't know. Can I hang on to some of my suits? I spent some money on the tailoring on these, man.
Welcome to the At Sea podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This Friday, June 16th, the Tupac Shakur biopic All Eyez on Me hits theaters. The film's named after the rapper's remarkable 1996 release, All Eyez on Me. And since his death in September of that same year, conversation around and engagement with Tupac and his work has never really gone away. He's one of those artists whose impact on his genre and culture is so deep that it still bears noting 2 decades after his last contribution. For many of his listeners, the connection wasn't just Tupac's incredible talent, but the unapologetic way he granted the world access to his story, a story in which millions of people recognized a bit of themselves and their own story. The All Eyez on Me album reached the very rare sales status known as diamond status, denoting the sale of over 10 million copies in the United States. Tupac's depiction of life within his own home and within his hometown is regularly recognized as not just important, but in many eyes, prophetic. My guest on this episode of the podcast is one such person. Daniel White Hodge is an author, a scholar, and a hip-hop theologian whose dissertation is focused on the life, theology, and spiritual message of Tupac Shakur. I highly recommend checking out his books after listening in on this conversation with Professor Daniel White Hodge. Check it out.
One of the challenges I have as being kind of this progressive, multi-ethnic kind of guy is to find a venue that knows what to do with me.
You.
Yes. Because it's easy to find like white guys, like a Rob Bell-ish type of thing.
Yeah.
And we got that venue. And so, there's Progressive Youth Ministry, there's the Open Network, there's Faith Forward Network. But I think they're all still trying to figure out the ethnic thing. But then you got the multi-ethnic environments, CCDA, Urban Youth Workers Institute, and they're by and large still very conservative. And so they're kind of looking at me like, I don't know about you, man.
Don't know where to put you.
Right. And so it's been interesting. It's been interesting to say the least. I mean, I've been to a couple of HBCUs, and January and February were a little crazy, just travel-wise and stuff. But the last month has been pretty, just pretty local and hanging out and whatnot. I knew I wanted to come to this, so when Ken invited me, I was like, oh, yeah, definitely, I'll come out. This is something that I've...
Because you were here 2 years ago.
I wasn't here 2 years ago. I got some people here, but I was here in 11 and then 13 as well.
Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, yeah, this has been a great space to just connect with. And
I would imagine you probably got a good number of phone calls or requests. I mean, you were busy post-election, folks trying to figure out language-wise, like, how do I articulate what's in my guts right here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's kind of a rough little space.
Oh, man. Well, and I turned down a few places because I was like, I went and spoke to places that I knew, that I had personal relationships with. Our former youth pastor. So I go to church, LaSalle Street Church in Chicago. So, it's pretty left-leaning, progressive, whatever. And we got to get started, man. I don't want to hold you up.
We're started. We're good.
Oh, good. Okay.
We're just going to talk.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. All right. And so, I forget. What was the question? You were saying that.
We were just talking about what you're doing post-election.
Yes. And so our former youth pastor, he took another job at another place. And so he was like, hey, I want to get you out. And, it was up in the suburbs of Chicago, all white, predominantly old. And so I was like, I'll come. But I'll come only because of you. And I trust that there will be some follow-up from that.
Yeah.
But I turned down a couple of other places that said, hey, we're looking at your website and everything. I was like, nah, I think who you need is this. Why don't you go check this person out? Because I just didn't see part of me has been, since the election, I've just gotten much more selective.
Yep.
And I know money's great, it helps pay for things, but it's not everything. And it's not the all-encompassing thing. And so for me, it's like I feel like I've been used by a lot of white churches to be the black person who comes in and does these things, and then there's no follow-up. I'm it, and then after that, it's kind of like, and then I turn into the punching bag, and I'm like, no. So even in my contract, I write up, like, if you want me to talk about race, then I have a whole questionnaire. Like, and one of the questions is, how long have you been dealing with this issue of race? What are your plans for follow-up?
Yeah.
Who is it that's going to be leading this on the ground?
Yeah. As opposed to coming in and providing that sense of, hey, we did a thing.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
We had our conversation.
Right. Right.
And now we can move on.
Exactly. Because there was a whole bunch of places that were like, hey, man, and Moody Radio was one of them. Like, hey, let's get you on. And I was like, all right, I'll give you 3 times. All right. And, it was like, no, we have to risk this. I was like, all right, I'm done. Excuse me, with places like that. Because it's just, and again, I'm not knocking it. I know that fits for somebody, but for me, I'm wanting to have genuine conversations around solutions, but also being able to sit in the tension of where we're at.
Yes. Yeah. And insofar as we had a conversation with a rapper named Propaganda.
Yes, I know Prop.
And part of what we got into was the difficulty of complexity, and that, and we didn't capture this part of the conversation for the podcast, but on the way over talking about this is almost like meta, but it's like the issue with talking about race as an issue.
Yes.
Gets to some of the stuff we were talking about this morning, in which you said that when you fall in love with ideas, when it becomes about ideas and methodologies and theology, when it's in your head, then the messiness of life becomes too much for you.
Exactly.
So as soon as I'm treating race as an issue, then it's a thing that is solvable, like mathematics,
right,
and B, it's not human. It's an idea. So then complexity.
Exactly.
I don't really know. I don't know what to do with. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with like wanting to help, but also having but also having to like embrace my complicity, or to feel empowered, but also live and deal with a little bit of shame, Like we struggle to sort of actually do those things, but that's actually the human road.
It is the human road, and the reality of it is, one of the passages that has really both resonated and challenged me a lot is the Daniel chapter where he's in the Nebuchadnezzar kingdom. And this is Daniel 3, 4, 5, and 6. But what gets me is that as I started looking at this, it was ironically, I was actually preparing this youth group. Not for real, I won't mention who they were. They invited me out.
It's one of those stories.
One of those stories.
Okay, man.
And they just thought, and honestly, neither one of us did really good research on either one. And it got to like a week before I was supposed to come out. And I was like, what did I just sign up for? And it was just rough. But what good came out of that, aside from being with my daughter for those 2 weeks, it was great, was that I got to really look at Daniel and really look at what was going on with King Nebuchadnezzar. And come to find out, King Nebuchadnezzar was like this mastermind, and that there were all these technological changes that he was bringing about to the city of Babylon. He was someone who restored the city. He brought wealth. He brought jobs. And that connecting line, so that when he propped up this statue, several scholars mentioned that, there were probably people who were in the audience who thought, well, I don't really think, he's probably compensating for something, but hey, he gave me a job. So why would I want to get thrown in the furnace? This is not something to die on. Like, I'm going to kneel down just because this dude. And one of the things that he did was actually when he captured the nations, yes, he would brutally murder their leaders, but kept the people of that community and put them to work. He empowered them. He gave them work. And so what the 3 Hebrew boys did was so much more elevated for me, because I find myself being comforted with tenure, with title, with a home, with a yard, that when I think about the revolutionaries who have made change happen, that is scary. I don't know if I could have been those 3 Hebrew boys. All of us want to be them, right?
Because you have to let go of the yard and the house and the paycheck.
And some levels on what that means. And then when God says, leave everything and come follow me, it's like, man, of course, we read those stories. Of course, yes, let's follow you, Jesus. But I'm like, man, I don't know. Can I hang on to some of my suits? I spent some money on the tailoring on these, man. So yeah, brother.
So when we talk about complexity and race, the doorway you walk through, which I think really does facilitate the conversation, is you walk through the door of hip hop. Yeah. Because, I don't know if you do this. I don't think you do this because, but for me, because you walk through the door of hip hop, what ends up happening is, to some degree, like now we're having a conversation about music. And it gives a participant in that conversation a little bit of like, okay, we can talk about music, and instead of talking directly about me, and then I can kind of work my way into like, actually, no, I do resonate with this, and now we're sort of on the level.
Exactly.
So you tell this really great story at the beginning of your book, which is called "The Soul of Hip Hop." You tell a story about your first. It's such a good story. Your first encounter with hip hop.
Yeah.
Can you recount that story a little bit?
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think, here I am in Texas. Again, it's tough for me to even admit that I want to be the Californian guy, but it's like, no, I was born in Texas. And at that time, there was no FM radio. Not FM, but there was no satellite radio. There was no, Siri or whatever. And so just barely catching those things. And to hear that, it was like, wow, it kind of almost like, what is this?
Like some song popped on the radio. Do you remember what the song was?
Yeah, it was a hip hop, a hip. It was
Rapper's Delight.
Rapper's Delight.
So good.
Which come to find out, now that I know my history, most people who are in the Bronx and who in the BK actually say, like, no, that song was bitten from actual true MCs.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, to even know that, but the irony of it is that's the Rapper's Delight was really what got me, and I'd never heard something like that.
Yeah.
And then to come to find out there was a Run DMC and they were Raising Hell, and I couldn't believe that was on the album of the record, like Raising Hell. Ooh, they said hell.
Yeah.
And so, but even then though, it spoke to me in a way that I couldn't really put into words at the time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And it was just something about it. And then of course, fast forward into the mid '80s and NWA, and then because again going in by the time we got to the mid-'80s, my mom had moved us, and we were on the West Coast. And so, growing up around heavy West Coast artists, Mac Mall, Spice One, Too Short, and out in the Bay Area and stuff, man, that music resonated with me.
Yes.
In a way that stemmed from that moment of hearing that Rapper's Delight. And
then specifically insofar as like hip hop was, and hip hop artists were speaking to, not just speaking to, but speaking from that complexity.
Yes.
Which we'll get to in a little bit to talk about. Like I said, we'll come to this, but talk about like the moment the Chance is having now,
right?
Which is cool, but it's not new, and it gets treated like it's a new
right.
thing, but it's not new,
right?
The way he's doing it to some degree is new, but it's not like the thing in itself is not new. The complexity of like the sense of like the divine hand in things and sort of this religious spiritual thing, but all mixed together with like we're also going to talk about drugs and guns, and we're still going to talk about violence. We're going to talk about sex and sexuality. We're going to and we're cool with these tracks. And one of the for you, the riots in '92. Was sort of this pivotal like moment. This wasn't a thing that happened on TV for you.
No, this was a real deal.
You were in it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think that was a culmination of growing up in Texas. I mean, I experienced obviously racism firsthand. Being a single black guy, I mean, literally, I was the only blackness in this town. So coming with that hate, coming with that environment, but I had never necessarily had the police like in a scary way come after me. And so to have police now beating you with batons, trying to tell people, it's like yelling in a vacuum. And no one hears you. Yeah. Like the old thing, in space, no one can hear you scream. In the hood, no one can hear you scream. Because we're telling people. Karis wouldn't even say, he said, man, we put it in our music, we put it on the walls, we put it in graffiti art, and no one listens. So this culmination came when I saw that, and I remember exactly where I was at. It was 12 o'clock. West Coast time. I was in English 4. It was my fourth period, right before lunch. We're watching closed circuit television, and our teacher wanted us to kind of give us a cultural studies. And I remember, it was the verdict, and it was coming out, and I'm just sitting there thinking,
and the verdict in the case was
the Rodney King trial, right? Well, and it was the officers that had beat Rodney King, right? It was time for their verdict and stuff, and so it struck me, even when they moved the trial to Simi Valley, which was at that time, not anymore, but at that time was a predominantly affluent white community. Was like, why didn't they put this in L.A. County? I mean, that's where they do everything else. So I remember seeing it. I remember the television just barely hanging off the concrete slab, and it coming across, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is an open shut case. Right. We got you on tape. Yeah. Like what? And so they hear not guilty. Parts of what I can remember, and as my therapist talked about, we've talked about this, the whole PTSD and stuff from parts that you don't remember, was literally just seeing red. And I don't even necessarily even consciously felt like we just got up out of our seats, and we had this, what was called the Greek Center, where it was like, where everybody kind of met, like the quad or whatever. Yeah. And so literally people were just pouring out of, like, this was before Twitter, so we couldn't text or do anything, but people somehow, it was like this connection through this nerve that had been hit. Yeah. it was like a dentist drilling into your tooth and hitting that nerve, but you ain't got no Novocaine.
Yeah.
And now it's you know, and so I remember my friend, he had a flag. I don't even know where he got the flag from. He had it in his pocket. He started burning, and the principal was like, no. And it just went from there.
Yeah.
You know, it just went from there. And it was just like, and that was the first moment in my life that I was ready to die just to exist, if that even makes sense.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm willing, and I saw myself dying in this thing. And who knows, in another split universe, maybe I did, you know, I don't know. But that was for me a moment of like, whoa, this is for real.
Insofar as like what it would mean to meaningfully belong to and be faithful to that moment could honestly cost you your life, which comes back to the thing you were saying before. Like, if I'm going to be faithful to and part of this,
there it is.
Can I give up whatever it takes to give, you know what I have to give up to be part of it, which in that moment was like, if this is what reality is like for a black man, like how do I be faithful to that moment if I'm not willing to put my life down? It's kind of what you're saying.
No, it's absolutely it. And I remember in the interview that Tupac has with Kendrick, you know, because I did my dissertation on him, so I was able to have access to a lot of just backroom interviews that Tupac did. But man, he says something so important in that he says that, you know, everybody who is doing something is really under the age of 25. Because at that moment, I didn't really have anything else. I didn't have a home, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have a kid. And it just makes you think twice. Now it's like, man, what I've been down in Ferguson doing? I mean, I went down to Ferguson, but I wasn't involved in the uprisings, right? I mean, I went to Baltimore, but I wasn't involved. And so it's just like, well, what does that mean? And you're right, it's a big thing. It's like, what does that look like? And I don't think we should start, that's the thing. All of this stuff could have been prevented. It's like I said this morning, it's like by the time you get to Radio Raheem and Do the Right Thing, and he's blasting the music in Sal's Pizzeria, it's too late. This could have been prevented long ago. And now we're to the point where it's like Tupac was saying in the clip, like we've had our level, we were asking, and we ain't asking anymore. And that was where I was at in that state of mind. And I feel myself going there in certain times and where we're at as a country. But again, it comes back to, but what does that look like at 43?
Right. And the thing you just said, it's like we've been asking, we're not going to ask anymore. The flip side of the conversation ends up being the notes that you'll get about like, hey, you know, why are we still talking about race?
Right.
And the answer ends up being like, well, because you're not listening. Like that's why we're still talking about this.
Right.
Because you know things haven't changed, and again, coming back to hip hop artists, that's part of the reason, which I pick up in your book. Tupac played such a major role for you, and when you the one I want to get into talking about like the theology of hip hop, and why what he was doing with with an understanding of God and humanity was so vital, because like he was making no apologies for his for having asked before. So can you give me a little bit of a lot of talk about Tupac? I mean you spent a number of years studying Tupac and like being in what he's done. Why is he someone that maybe it's the question I want to ask. Not even just why is he significant, but like why as someone who, if I'm someone who wants to pay attention. Why should I pay attention to Tupac? Yeah,
man, that's a good question. I mean, even as you're asking that, I'm thinking, man, I mean, for me, as I've looked at it, Tupac, it really galvanizes the issues of, man, pain. Man, we're going to talk about depression. We're going to talk about being that little, I mean, when you look at Tupac was not necessarily what the image he gave off in public. Like investigating, looking, I mean, this was a sensitive kid. This was a kid that went to the Baltimore School of Performing Arts. I mean, this guy went to a very privatized school until his mom couldn't afford to go in there anymore. But that's where a lot of people got their start. I mean, Jada Pinkett Smith is there. I mean, the list goes on of who was there. And so he was an artist type of kid. And so to see where he was at and to see him have to go through and see his mom be succumb to a crack addiction, to have to live in those conditions, to have it, he is able to speak from that. And I'm able to relate to that because I had my mom who was a crack addict. I had my mom who had to deal with that, being a single mom, raising a kid. Now, granted, I didn't have siblings, but still my mom raising that. And so I was able to connect with that. I was able to connect with that experience of being able, that's the thing about California, it's like you can see the wealth. I mean, that's the thing about Chicago. It's like, you in the hood, you in the hood. There's empty lots, there's dogs running around crazy.
Yeah.
But in California, some of the projects, they got ocean views.
Yeah.
And so in LA, you can see the Hollywood sign. So you can, from South Central, you can see that. You can see those aspects of that.
Yeah.
And it reminds you every day of what you don't have.
It's like but just so you know, like in the same way that you'll have like Tupac lyrics or Kendrick lyrics that are sort of like hanging out in your head and you're ready to pull. I have all these lines from like Batman comics. And Batman movies. And part of what you're talking about here, and it is part of of Tupac's story, is there's no. Bane says to Bruce Wayne as they're down in the pit, he says, "There's no true despair without hope."
Yes.
That like part of the pain that Tupac gets to communicate is like I'm in this school, I've got the ramp out, right, and then and then like within reach of like getting out, all this stuff falls apart and it happens that quickly, exactly, and that like you had this sliver of a chance and it goes away, and that ends up being part of the pain,
exactly, and it's. For me, it's so much of the, I mean, I don't think Tupac is Jesus, but it's so much of the story of Christ. It's like, how do you sit in the middle of that madness, that mess? You got one of your boys who's doing you in. I mean, in the constant drama of just life in general, right? Of like you said, but still being able to speak to that from an artistic perspective and still infuse it with God, still infuse it with some theology, but at the same time still questioning. I mean, it's a work of art for me, because it's like if I try to do it, it'd be all theological heavy, or it'll be all just nothing but pain. But he nuances it in such a way that people are able to grasp, and not just people from that era. I mean, but you still have young people who were buying his albums who weren't even alive when Tupac was around. Yeah. But they're able to connect, and for me, that is the power of somebody like that. I mean, you think about somebody like a Jimi Hendrix, or you think about somebody like a what's his name, Morrison from the Doors or something, or the Grateful Dead, right? Yeah. These are artists who have been able to reach across album sales and touch at your very soul. And so for Tupac, it is somebody who's able to sit in wretched pain but still talk about it in a way that is relatable. Yeah. Yeah.
And part of that has to do with the excellence of his craft.
Absolutely.
That he was phenomenal.
Absolutely.
As a talent.
He was gifted. He was really, truly gifted.
And what he was doing, that's what I'll get to. Like, you know, we celebrate and lift up, and we should. I mean, this moment that Chance has now, which is the phenomenal moment, and he's incredibly talented. But again, what he's doing with with Coloring Book, it's not particularly new. Where you have like the songs about. There's religion mixed in, but then there's sort of an uncomfortable turn, and you've got to be okay with the F-bombs and it. Like,
right.
That's not new. It not only is it not new to rap and hip hop, that's not new to black music and black culture. The comfortability level with like the wholeness of a person. So anyways, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like what Tupac was doing in providing a way to talk about God in human terms that didn't have the same kind of gatekeeping thing going on that evangelical Christianity did. Right. Where it's like, we're going to create space for folks who like they're oh my gosh, they're sexual beings. Right. Oh, and we can deal with that. Yeah. And in the same song, like hang out in a religious space. Right, exactly.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, I think, so Coloring Book builds, I think, and that's the thing with Coloring Book. You think of Kendrick Lamar's work, even Janelle Monáe, I think it builds off of some of the stuff that Tupac and a lot of the pioneers laid, obviously. And they will give you that sense of history and pay due diligence, right? So in one sense of the word, you have this encompassing aspect of newness, in the sense that you have a masterful piece of work that's built on the shoulders of somebody like Tupac, right? Yeah. And you heard in the interview, right? It's like, Chance doesn't come from the stereotypical rap background, doesn't know his mom. I mean, so he's raised in the church, and here you got this artist who's able to sit. I mean, he's really part of, dare I say, an element of what I was talking about in the soul of hip hop, like an artist that is able to walk the world of both the realm of hip hop and then Christianity, and be able to mix them in a way that is relatable.
Yeah.
And he puts it in such an artful, masterful way that and he's not beholden to any label. It's like, oh my gosh, it's almost the best of all worlds, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But he is able to connect with not only just the gospel choir aspect of that, but also the profane aspects of what life is. And like you said, the whole body. So we're not just going to just look at, the struggle and it was hard. We're going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about race. We're going to talk about women. We're going to talk about these things. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like coloring book.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
In my estimation.
Yeah. There's a thing I've kind of taken in doing with the podcast, specifically when trying to help with even my own kind of cultural translation. So and it's sort of like establishing a little bit of a lexicon. So what I want to do is I'm going to kind of pitch you some words or phrases, and just let you kind of vamp there. So it's not to some degree it's a way to define the word, but also could just be a matter of what's the word to sort of draw out of you.
Okay.
And so and some of it's going to be stuff that's has come from your work. Or some that's just going to be kind of terms that you might use that you have a particular set of understandings that you're bringing to the table that if I actually knew what he meant by that.
Yeah.
So I'll give you the quick list. I'll actually give it to you one at a time. So the hood.
I mean, there's so much there with that.
Right. That's why that's why just whatever it draws out of you. So the hood.
I mean, Murray Frommel writes a good book, called The Hood Comes First, Space and Place. And really I think about it, okay, what is that space? What does that mean? I mean, when I think about the hood, for me, I think about a certain level of comfortability, if I'm honest. I mean, there's a certain aspect of seeing multiple storefront churches. I'm thinking about Chicago now. I'm thinking about multiple storefront churches, a closed-up building, gates. I mean, there's something comfortable about that because I know when I go outside of the hood, there's a certain uncomfortability that comes with that. And I imagine it'll be the same way as somebody who comes from that environment coming into this environment, be like, oh my gosh, it's dirty, it's this, that. But there's some comfortability because it's part of what I grew up in. So that space of nasty dirt mixture is there. At the same time, when I think about what's going on in places like Chicago, where the hood, I mean, it's like, for example, so I live on the west side of Chicago, and so going into church, we, traverse a whole bunch of set of different neighborhoods. And so when I think about going down North Avenue, heading east, and we cross over Western, the minute you cross over Western, it is a completely different environment. Now, that wasn't the case 15 years ago. When you think about where our church was right in the heart of the Cabrini Green neighborhood. Cabrini Green was well known for their, housing projects, where Good Times was based off of. That hood is not a hood anymore. It's inner city, definitely inner city by a geographical location, but not culturally. There's people that are picking up the trash. There's people literally walking around with big old trash cans and they're sweeping and they're cleaning up and stuff because of the gentrification that's happening on. So for me, there is also a change of how we define the hood. So I think of displacement and I think of people being moved on and moved away from. I think about places like Skid Row that was once a burgeoning 150 blocks of really a haven for a lot of homeless people is now crunched down to less than 7 blocks in Los Angeles because, again, people are buying those places up. People are buying them. People are turning in them. When you think about the Nokia Center in downtown Los Angeles, that is an entertainment hub. What that means is that if it's zoning in places like entertainment cities like Los Angeles, that means that if you own a business there, you will always defer to what the entertainment is of that moment. So they can come and film, do anything they want, and so, but that brings with it a whole different set of zoning. In fact, filmmakers don't even really have to go to the city to get permission because it has been deemed an entertainment hub, it's an entertainment zone, and so that, while that sounds great and wondering, like, oh my gosh, we get to see Clooney or whatever, it displaces people because it also means we also don't want to see a certain type of folks there. So I think about that when I think about the hood.
And this is a word you capitalize in the book. Whiteness. Yes. You mean in terms of like whiteness? Explain that one more time. Sorry.
So
even in the book when you're talking about your wife, and you talk and you say my wife is white, and you capitalize the word white.
Yes.
So when you talk about white. And whiteness, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the race of it. And so I do capitalize it to emphasize the racial connotation of what that means to be white or to be black. And I know this came up even in my reviews, and somebody was saying, well, why doesn't he use African American or Euro American? And so, and again, I want to be consistent, but it's, again, illustrating the aspects of race, like talking about race in that sense, because we really have those binary terms, because we really don't talk about brown people, right, as Latinx. We don't talk about yellow people. We dang sure don't say yellow for Asian people. We don't say red people for that. But we still are in those binary gardens of white and black. And so I kind of want to bring some of those things out to the table in that. So yes, I do capitalize that. And I've been capitalizing in the works that I do when I can. Some editors are like, no, we're not going to capitalize it. So you go with what they got. Yeah.
Talk about anger.
Oh man, anger. That, I mean, I think it's necessary. I think once upon a time I was looked at as being too angry, and I think that's not necessarily the Western Christian way of looking at things, right? I think my evangelical skin says, well, anger, that's of the devil and this, but now I see like it's a necessary part if you're going to engage. I think Jesus had a lot of anger. I think Jesus was frustrated. I think he was pissed at times. And so I think it's a natural human reaction. I think it's how we deal with it, how we engage or compartmentalize it, how we ignore it, how we overlook it, that makes the problems or makes it good. I mean, so for me, it's like I think there has to be some sense of righteous anger. There has to be some sense of just anger in general, because there's a lot to be angry about. Yeah. And I think those who say, oh, no, I can't be angry, let's just keep this smile on, it's like, I just can't be kumbaya about it. I just can't. There's just too much going on. At least being a black man, I was talking with some white associates of mine who were like, "Oh, Trump's presidency is just going to be hilarious. He's just an oaf, and he's going to be a goof, and it's just going to be a fun 4 years." I'm like, for who? For maybe you. This hasn't been fun. None of this has been fun. This is an era that I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with that? So it's like, for me, yes, I'm angry. I'm angry that we have gotten to this place and we're still residing in it. I didn't think I would see the anger and the visceral hate that I experienced as a kid in Texas be in the highest office. So for me, I'm angry about that. Yeah.
Theology.
Oh my gosh, the study of God. Like, what does that mean? I mean, theology, I think, is such a grandiose thing, right? You think about theology, and then whose theology? Who gets to tell the narrative of theology? If it was just that, like, let's come. I mean, I think about somebody like Soon-Chan Rao, who talks about, and he even takes the illustration, I think, from Andrew Walls that relates the gospel and theology around like a baseball game. I mean, I'm a football guy, so I relate it to football. And it's like going to a stadium, and if we were able to see the game from multiple perspectives, right, and see that from a perspective of, oh, the nosebleed section, this is what I saw. Well, I was right next to the coach. This is what I saw. Well, I was a player. This is what was going on. And if we were able to get together after the game and hear all of those and validate those views, then I could think about it as theology. But unfortunately, we don't. We see, nope, this is the only way to view theology and to see it is from the press box. Because that is the most holy of holy places. And so you will see theology from that. That, for me, is when, as Charles Kimball says, when religion becomes evil. It becomes a place of control, of manipulation. That's what I love about the film Eli, the Book of Eli. It's like, this aspect of trying to grasp religion, because he even says it, I saw what it did to people. If we want to control more than one town, we have to go after this book. And that's the power of it, right? And so and that's, like I said, for me, it's like when I see these book covers coming out, I'm like, man, where is the diversity? But that's just it. We've been asking for a long time. It's like you see these conference things. So for me, I'm angry about that. And so, but rather than just sit in that, let me go out and try to do something. Let me create spaces for other ethnic minorities to come in, women to come in, LGBTQ folks to come in, so we can have a different narrative. And I think now with the advent of the internet, podcasts, the electronic, the digital age, we are able to kind of break out of that norm, and it scares the hell out of people. I think it scares the fact that, it's this dystopian hope that we were going to have this multi-ethnic wave of people come and somehow get rid of white supremacy, and once we get the majority of minorities in place, right? No, man. Because we've learned anything from South Africa. We know that you don't have to be in the majority to have power. And so we saw that kind of dystopic, myopic space of being like disillusioned, like, well, what just happened? Like, how did this, I thought we had the numbers. Well, theology is dictated, right? I mean, you got people saying this is God's choice. This was God's choice to run this country. Memes that are putting up with Jesus with bags walking down the road saying, I'm heading back to the White House now. As if Obama, wasn't, a Christian. But think about it. Obama had to give up his pastor in order to get the White House. Right? I mean, so what Obama had to give up, and it's like, and I always tell folks, man, if you can't get with Obama, I mean, there's like, man, Ivy League educated, well-spoken, articulated, married once, 2 kids. It's like that stereotype, right? The politics of identity and the politics of just trying to be this person that we've been told in society. So that goes right back into theology. It's like, what have we learned about theology? And I would say the racism is in the theological DNA, and it's in the water. We've been drinking it. It's in our bloodline. It's in our system. And so to purge some of that stuff out means to really relook and re-examine the Bible from a different lens. So theologically speaking, that's big, and it's too much for some people. Yeah. It's overwhelming for somebody to try to say, I don't want to have to look at God from an Afrocentric perspective. So we'll have, even when you think about Biggie. Biggie had the encrusted, when you think about the encrusted white Jesus, he still had a white Jesus on his Jesus nonetheless, but it's still a white Jesus. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we've been indoctrinated a certain way, to think a certain way, to act a certain way. And so it's scary to move out from that, if that makes sense.
Speaking of scary,
yes,
talk about the word, because you do a few bits in the book around this word, and you actually did a bit earlier today around the word nigger.
Yeah,
that's like that. You don't necessarily demystify the word.
Yeah,
but you break it down in a way that's like in my reading is a little unusual.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, yeah. It's always I hear a white guy saying nigger. I'm always like, oh man, all right.
Right.
It's
exactly.
It still strikes a chord,
Right, and that's why I'm like,
I mean, it's a couple of things. Well, so for me, I mean, there's nigga. So there's the enunciation of it as a rhetorical perspective, N-I-double-G-A. That is more of the accepted term within the community. Well, it's not even just within black people, but we'll talk about that here in a second. But within the black community, I mean, so that's if I'm referring to somebody, yo, man, that's my nigga. In the rhetoric sense, it's a word like it's what's called an infix. I mean, an infix means it has several different meanings, several different enunciations, connotations, pronunciations. It's like the F word, right? It's like it can be used in a different plethora of ways. Well, it's the same thing with nigga. I get where it's come from, and I get some of the arguments against the word. Like, well, when the NAACP said, we're going to, ban the word, it's like, well, that really didn't do much for the younger generation, and that just emboldened them even more to say it even more. But I think for me, the word, it means something more than just the derogatory sense. I was called nigger, right? The N-I-double-G-E-R, right. Which is, for me, that's a whole nother level. And it's one of those terms, though, that is interesting, right? Because you don't have, for example, Jews calling each other, oh, hey, kike, that's all, that's just a word. No. You don't have other white folks calling themselves, hey, honky, hey, cracker, just that. So what does that mean then for black people? Because now you have a whole generation that has missed out on the history of everything, ethnic minorities, especially black. So they hear a rapper saying something like that, and then they think, well, I can emulate that. I can say that. It's in the music. Yeah. In fact, I'm forgetting where it was, but it was about 6-7 years ago. There was a crime of a white guy beating up, I'm forgetting, it was somewhere on the East Coast. White guy beating up a black guy. He was calling him nigga. He was like, hey, nigga this, nigga this, nigga this. But the defense was just like, well, hey, both of these kids are listening to rap music, and he was just emulating the words from the music. And it got taken down from a hate crime into just like a misdemeanor offense or whatever. It was taken down from that because the judge felt like, well, yeah, it's in the music. So there's power behind this sense of nigga and then what that means. And then again, the question of who can say it. And it's like one of those things, right? It's like that's an insider word, but then now I hear Armenians, I hear Koreans, I hear Vietnamese folks who really haven't really, even in some sense understood the breadth of that, but they know it's something that the rap is saying, so that's part of pop culture, so we're going to indoctrinate that. And so there's a lot going on in that. So for me, it's about, I use it among friends, I use it among colleagues in the sense that I know or I have a close relationship with. But outside of that, I've really tried to limit it because I know it sends so many mixed messages, particularly to white audiences.
Yes.
And I know that me saying it then in some sense gives other whites excuses to be, oh, well, if he's saying it, and he's making fun of it, let's just the same. It must not mean the same thing. So because I realize that I, whether I like it or not, am a representative of black people.
Yes.
I don't necessarily want that, but I'm a representative. When I show up to white spaces, I am judged and looked at as liberal or progressive minded as people want to be. I'm still looked at as like, oh, well, this black guy said it. Like, you know, this monolithic type of person. So
yes.
I have to watch myself with how I use that word in public spaces.
Yeah, my friend Caitlin talks about like being in meetings with like predominantly men.
Yeah.
And they'll like bring her in to get the female perspective, as if this one woman is fully representative of womanhood.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's like,
well,
we're going to talk to Daniel and we're going to get the black perspective.
Right.
And like, if this is what this black man means by this word, well, then that's applicable, and we can sort of, as opposed to, once again, like the complexity of like, what does that actually mean? Who gets to use it? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and that's just it. I mean, but that continues to happen. I mean, that continues to be the case. And like I said, across the board of minorities, like, oh, well, let's, like I said, bring the women in, or bring the Asian in, or bring the one minority in, and they'll sign off on this, and then we'll get going. I mean, it's like the conversation I have with some of these progressive spaces that have these conferences. It's like, you know, oh, we want more ethnic minorities. Like, well, do you want us, or do you just want part of us? So it looks good. And that's a question I think a lot of folks are trying to wrestle with right now, and what that looks like. Because I know who's running it, it doesn't look like me. You know, even if I see other people that look like me. And so that, even going back to the theology word, there's gatekeeping, and I know who's at the gatekeeping place.
Talk about theomusicology.
So it's a methodology, again, developed by John Michael Spencer back in the 80s. You know, it's not looked upon a lot. I mean, you got to kind of dig for that. But theomusicology is really the theological understanding of not just music, the rhythmic portion of music, but the context in which it was created, the era it was created, the historical significance on any kind of cultural continuum. So if we're looking at blues, if we're looking at jazz, we got to look at not just the artists and their music, but what made somebody like a Quincy Jones put together that album, or albums particularly between the years of 1979 and 1985, which I really recall as kind of his golden, you know, years of, you know, all the stuff that he produced during that time. But think about it, that was at the height of particularly black soul music. You have Michael Jackson coming out with an album. You have Donna Summer, who was working underneath him. You have even white artists, Michael McDonald. I mean, the list goes on. And so when I think about theomusicology, it investigates, it explores that. So that we don't just look at lyrics in a vacuum and simply say, oh, this artist said God in that lyric. Well, no. I mean, that's why I showed the video of Chance in my workshop. It's like, I want you to see that this is a long narrative that stretches much broader than one lyric in a song. And so theomusicology investigates that. It looks at the secular, the sacred, and the profane, and how all of those speak theologically, each individually, and also how they intersect about the music, the artist, and of course the context of which it was formed. And so theomusicology creates, for me at least, a better space to look at hip hop, because it encompasses more than just lyrical analysis. Now, I'm not necessarily knocking lyrical analysis, but it's been done to death. It's like plot analysis in film studies. It's like, okay, all right, we got
it's also hyper limited. Like, it's like this. There's this element of the form. But there's so much more to the form, and if we're just hanging out on the lyrics, if that's the only space, then you're not going to understand the whole of what's actually happening in the song. It's
like looking at one of the songs. I mean, like, for example, Tupac writes a song, "You Wonder Why They Call You Bitch." It's like, if you look at that just in a vacuum, it's kind of like, well, man, he's using the bitch word, he's calling out women, I don't know what he's talking about. But that song was actually connected to his sister, who at the time was out on the street, was out, you know, selling her body. And in an interview, he talks about how she came to him one day, they were having lunch, and she was just like, man, I wonder why all these niggas calling me bitches and this and this, and I ain't no bitch and everything. And so he puts a song out talking about, you wonder why they call you bitch. Well, here's why. And then here's what you got to do to get out of that situation. And so there's a broader spectrum, right? Kind of the backstory, if you will. And so theomusicology, again, provides that space theologically, going back to theology, about where God shows up. Or maybe God doesn't. Maybe when you think about it, you know, I mean, that's the question around Kanye. It's like, well, is Kanye just doing this to just gain attention and sell albums? Is he really who he says he is?
Yeah.
And part of theomusicology allows that tension to sit in there.
And part of one of the things you get into the book about, again, the sort of that something you don't get to if you're just doing lyrical analysis is the way gospel music, specifically black gospel music, sets up hip hop, and that there's a pretty direct lineage there. And I think I'm going to get the quote right. So black gospel music, this is from your book, black gospel music set a liberating tone for anyone living in an oppressed context. Hip hop is its postmodern equivalent.
Yes.
Can you break that down a little bit more?
Absolutely. I mean, I think black gospel music, particularly when you think about what was happening even within the antebellum South, and even prior to that, I mean, when you think about what was happening in enslavement times, music was at the core of speaking to the oppression, Howard Thurman says is the best. We cannot allow the moment of our time and the era of where we're at to define who we are. And music helped propel people out of that. Now, fast forward into the 50s and you have the commercialization of this. I mean, I think anytime anything goes commercial, the soul of it is in question.
Yeah.
And so when you think about album sales, and you think about modern gospel art, I mean, a lot of it is framed around a theology of praise, or a theology of celebration, which I'm fine. We got to celebrate. We got to praise God. But we have left out the lament, which was so staunch and so much a part of the fabric of black gospel music.
Yeah.
And so hip hop said, we're going to take up the mantle and we will continue that lament.
Yeah. We
will continue to talk about this heart. We will continue to talk about life in life's terms rather than just talking about, we'll talk about celebration. Yeah, we'll talk about, praising, deity and deity figures, but we need to figure out how to sit in these tensions. And that's, part of...
You want to be able to say that when the praises go up, the blessings come down, but you also want to be able to say, you don't want a problem with it.
Right, exactly. And you think about, postmodern, post-soul, however you want to, name your post, it reaches into an era that we are in the sense that it's able to encompass this whole transmediated diet of electronic digital age. How do we process all of this information, all the information that we just get from our phone, our tablets, our computers, and then how do we begin to see God in that, or do we not? Is it too much? And I think part of that's what hip hop does. And this moves hip hop beyond just the music. Now we're actually getting into the core, the culture of hip hop that looks and seeks to live out. I mean, there are whole hip hop, like for example, there are hip hop, what do you call them? Dietitians that go out and they got entire health farms based around the the foundational elements of hip hop culture. Yeah. And they are I was at, American Academy of Religion. This was in Chicago and in Baltimore. There was a whole group there, dealing with hip hop and food, right? And of course we know about hip hop and politics. So it's not just the music, it's a culture. It's a mode of living. And so to go back into that, I mean, when I think about, the broadness of that, again, hip hop is speaking to it in so many different ways.
In a sense, part of what you draw out and that I begin to understand paying attention to your work is that in the same way that you talk about in times of enslavement, that African folks who were like not wanting to be defined by like this is it. My circumstances are what they are. End of story. Yeah. It's sort of like hip hop ends up being in the same way that the gospel music was. Yeah. A way to sort of war against it is what it is.
Exactly.
Because it's not. It's not like it isn't just what it is.
Yeah.
To some degree, the question you get to ask as a human is, what are you going to make of this?
Exactly.
Like what do you make out of this? And what hip hop does in being rooted in praise in the same way that black gospel music is, but also just like black gospel music, we're gonna go to praise, and that's fine, but we're not gonna ignore. This isn't escapism,
right?
This is like a full human declaration of of my hope, and my circumstance, and what I plan on doing with it,
absolutely,
which makes hip hop a little bit more complex.
And it's what Chance is trying to do, bringing in gospel choirs and singing in there. I mean, he's trying to bridge those worlds that are so similar.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because it's like, man, we think about Ray Charles. Somebody like Ray Charles was a known profane artist back in his time.
Yeah.
You know, because he's combining gospel, blues, and his own sound. And this is what artists are trying to do today, you know. Yeah. So it irks me when people are like criticizing Chance. I mean, you know, can we talk about his theology? Of course, but for the most part, for me, it is in essence of what I was trying to talk about in the soul of hip hop. He is able to bridge some of those areas and do it in a genuine way of still remaining himself.
And if in the Christian context, if we're not going to talk about like the area, we keep using the word profane. If we're not going to talk about the human and the dirty and this is, I mean, Christian theology is like points at a divine being who became human.
Right.
So if we're not going to do theology that actually digs into and is comfortable with the complexity and the grossness and the messiness of humanity, then maybe we're not doing Christian theology. Maybe this is Gnosticism.
Right.
And we mask it as Christianity. Right. Because it's a little bit easier to sell the escape than it is life in the hood.
And I think that goes back to what we were just talking about. It's like to look at that aspect of Christianity requires a lot of work, a lot of mental work, a lot of fortitude. And I would dare say a lot of church environments are not necessarily ready for that.
You write in the book, part of, if not most of, the religious disconnect people have with hip-hop culture seems to stem from variations of our take on Jesus. Mm-hmm. And you say most see him as a mild, gentle, and peaceful man. Yeah. So, like, can you talk a little bit about like what you see in the when you think of the person Jesus?
Yeah.
And the way hip hop and the theology of hip hop sort of draws out of like the biblical narrative of Jesus. Like, this is the richer picture than maybe most might be familiar with.
I think, you know, I always say this, like, Jesus' story is hip hop, right? It's like, man, you got 12 boys, one of them did you in, baby mama drama, hated, from the hood. Man, that's hip hop story. But we miss that because, again, we've tried to dress Jesus up into something that Jesus wasn't. And Jesus is this kind of profane prophet. At the same time, he's sacred. And at the same time, he is trying to work within a human confine of a body. And so people say, okay, he's sinless. Okay, we can go with that argument. But I also have to take into notion that when he went into that church and was beating fools down, come on now. He wasn't like, oh, bless you. Oh, bless you. Man, I'm pretty sure he was saying some interesting things. When you go in and turn over tables, that's not, I mean, think about somebody coming to a conference and turning over tables and saying, hell no, we ain't going to be doing this stuff and whipping people. I mean, come on. Whipping people, are you serious? Like, what is this, the Old West? And so Jesus is sitting there doing this, and we miss these nuances of who Jesus was. And that's why I like the Gospel of John. I think the Gospel of John is amazing and just in how John breaks down the story of Jesus and really draws the story out of Jesus really being this person who was, dare I say, a shit starter, man. I mean, he's going in and recreate, like, you know, he's out there walking, doing things, healing people on the Sabbath, and people are like, wait, what the hell are you doing, dude? Why are you doing this? You know, and then people in John 6, they're asking him, like, okay, what will you do to show us these miracles? Now, keep in mind, John 6, he's just fed the 15,000, right? I mean, we was more than 5,000. We all know that. You know, they didn't count women and, you know, and children and everything. So he just fed a gang load of people, right? He's just walked on water. He's calmed the storms, but people are still asking, what will you do for us? And then he says something that at that time was radical. He says, to come to heaven, to enter into the heaven, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. Woo! That was a sin worthy of the auto da fe and the Spanish Inquisition. This was worthy of death. And it says there in John 6:66, many who were with him withdrew from him and walked with him no more. It was just too much because the Levitical code forbade anybody like, wait a minute, we're going to be turning into zombie Jesus? No, hell no. Dude, I was with you. I thought you were going to say something nice, but eat flesh and drink.
Well, even in the moment he turns and he has to have the conversation with the 11/12,
right?
Because he has that. He's like, so are you going to go
right,
too?
Exactly.
Which kind of leads you to the thought, like, they might have been hedging. They might have been thinking, like, I don't know if I can stick with this.
No, absolutely. There's plenty of again, paracanonical literature that supports that. I mean, these disciples were like, who is this dude? We thought we were just going to go out here. I mean, in Luke records this. Even when the disciples were walking before they see Jesus and meet him on the path or whatever, they're saying we had hoped. I've done entire sermons on we have hoped. What have you have hoped for that Jesus would have done? We had hoped we would have hoped we were going to be sitting right next to him in the kingdom, and we would then be the rulers and masters and be able to issue punishments. And they just completely missed that thing, right? And I'm sure there were questions like, who the hell is this dude? Why are we're ostracized now? You know that we're put on a bad list now? Do you know that? Oh, okay, all right, so I don't know. So, and in one way, as I look at Barnabas, I look at, and you think it's almost one way of him trying to get back and being like, well, let me get back in good favor. Let me try to help, these things out. And so all I'm saying is that, or not even Barnabas, but, I'm spacing the brother's name who turned on Jesus. What was it?
You're talking about Judas.
Judas, there we go. I think Judas was in one sense, trying to, if you read other manuscripts and look at things, I think he was in one sense trying to kind of just make up for like, okay, look, I'm trying to help him out. He's going to prove himself to be God. If I just turn him in, he'll do it. He'll make us better. This is good. And so I don't know, man. It's just interesting when I think about Jesus, because Jesus' story, I keep coming back to Jesus' story, even more so than the writings of Paul, quite honestly.
Let's wrap it up in this way. Like I talked about, and I don't know if we'll see if we can pull this off, but I talked about like having lines from films or whatever in my head. Are there lyrics for you, like come back and they sort of stick to your soul? They're sort of like food for you. That when you talk about like hip hop and theology, or the theology of hip hop, there's this there's a spiritual practice then that comes from like taking in and meditating on lyrics. Are there lyrics that kind of hang out in your heart that you come back to?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'm so bad at memorizing.
That's all right.
But there are certain ones. I mean, I think about Ice Cube's America's Most Wanted, his initial albums. Again, I have issues with Ice Cube and just his view, particularly of LGBTQ folks, and just some of his views on women in general. Even though he's, of all people in hip hop, he's been married to the same woman.
Yeah, right.
Kim. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kids. I mean, it's like a whole. They're like his kids are now old money.
Yeah.
So obviously, there's more to Ice Cube's picture than him calling women bees and hoes, right? Obviously, but I think his first solo album, man. I think about. He's like, when he says, you want to free Africa, I stare at you, because we ain't got it too good in America. I can't mess with them overseas. My homeboy died over keys and cocaine. It was plain and simple. The 9mm went to the temple. And then he goes right from that into, pop, 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 I put the bitch down. I hung out in a schoolyard bathroom, because he was hiding from the police, mad as, thinking about the payback. Tonight me and Koo had a little fun. We sawed off the barrels of my shotgun. So he goes exactly from grief into how I'm going to exact retaliation. Now, somebody hears that and they think, oh my gosh, that's so violent, that's ugly. What does our military do? We people don't go over there and just, okay, stop doing this. Don't do that. No, they killing folks. And that kill. And so same thing with Tupac. When you think about, you want to, he says, it's kind of hard to be optimistic when your homie's lying dead on the pavement twisted. But y'all don't hear me though. I'm trying hard to make amends, but I'm losing all my mother effing friends. How long will they mourn me? So lyrics like that are like haunting, because I'm like, man, I remember seeing friends of mine being killed and thinking like, yes, it is. It's hard to be optimistic. It's hard to have this hope of what's to come when all I see is pain and misery in front of me. And so for me, it's like, but he's still singing this in Hail Mary, like, Hail Mary, how long, oh no, that's the song, How Long Will They Mourn Me, excuse me. How long will they mourn me? It's like, and he's talking this thing. I mean, so many tears. It's like, he's talking about how I'm struggling in these streets, right? I'm struggling in these arenas, but yet I'm praying to the Lord to let me into heaven's gate, So so those are some of the ones that stick to me.
Thanks, man. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, man. This has been great.
Good. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Etsy Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you did, please leave a review at iTunes and share it with a few friends. Also know you can find all the resources referenced in this conversation by visiting @cpodcast.com and finding the page specific to this episode. Once you're there, consider becoming a patron of this particular art form by clicking the Patreon button and joining the community that's not only making this podcast happen, but also helping to make it better. Patrons had early access to this episode, as they do every episode, along with a few other perks you might find enticing. Until next time.